charting your rise to FIFA. Like, was this? Did you became OFC Deputy General Secretary a year afterwards, right? 2014.
Yeah.
Do you think that was directly related to that speech?
Yeah, 100%. It was at that point. I felt also, the time I moved to OFC was also the right time for me to move on, because football in Samoa was fantastic at that point in time. We had kids programs, grassroots going every weekend. We had talent ID programs. We had the national teams playing, youth, senior. We had the National League. We had the business competition that was everything was going, and it was smooth and it was awesome. And I was kind of at this point where I felt like it was time to move on. And having that speech and that moment of recognition, but also that greater understanding of what I could do with my platform, it gave me this motivation to kind of go out and go bigger. Yeah. So, yeah, I came back to Auckland. I was here for a trip in Auckland. And, yeah, I went into the office in Oceania and asked them for a job. I said, listen, I'm ready to come home. I'm ready to move on. I want to stay in football. It's really important to me that I stay in football. Do you have a job for me? And they did. Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, the FIFA world explodes. And it's the worst crisis in global football history.
Bro.
You're like listening to your story in isolation. Global financial crisis.
Yeah.
There's a catalyst for change in your situation. And then this FIFA crisis in 2015. And there's a change. It's like somehow the universe has attracted you to chaos, but also smoothing out those waters, because you were really pivotal in terms of that reshaping of FIFA.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, it was so interesting, because at the time I was working in Oceania. I was a Deputy General Secretary, and they have these massive FIFA congresses every year. So FIFA Congress is like all the 211 countries from FIFA come together in one location. They stay in these amazing hotels and have this beautiful experience, and they all go in and vote on things like statutes and whatever. So it was like this huge event, and I was there with all the OFC people. This is in Zurich, in Switzerland, in 2015. At the same time, the Under-20 World Cup was happening here in New Zealand. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So we were there having our usual meetings, and we woke up. Then I remember waking up, and it was almost the same as the situation on match day one with the shooting. In the hotel room, woke up, my phone was going off. I was like, what is happening? Turn on the TV, and on CNN, and that's when you know shit is real, when it's on CNN, they showed the Boralac, which is like the swankiest hotel in Zurich, which is the one where all like the main dudes were staying, like the president and all the executive people. They showed police cars swarming outside that fucking 5-star hotel, and police escorting people out in handcuffs under bed sheets into police cars. And the headlines were like, FIFA officials arrested, blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't believe what was going on. I was like, what? What is happening? It was so surreal. It was this other moment. So, yeah, we went, again, it was like this kind of crisis mode. I mean, we didn't have anything to do with that, obviously, but I just remember everyone on that day were like, what is happening? What is going on? Like, this is the biggest global body for sport internationally. Our president, all the main like executive dudes, were basically being arrested on TV.
On live TV.
On live TV. And I just remember sitting there and thinking, fuck, what does this mean? Yeah, and they went, yeah, I mean, fuck, they were all corrupt. They were all corrupt. And they deserved it in the end. They got their just desserts. But, yeah, that was another moment. And what that meant was FIFA was like inches away from being declared a criminal organisation by the US Department of Justice. What that actually means is FIFA was about to be declared the same level as the mafia, like an actual criminal mafia organisation. Like, that's how serious it was, and how deep the corruption was, and how entrenched it was, and the money changing hands, the backdoor deals that were going on. I mean, it's all been documented now. You can read books about it. Fucking crazy levels of corruption. And yeah, FIFA was seen to be part of that, like criminals.
And so they decide to create a reform committee.
Yeah.
And 15 people,
Yeah.
you get chosen.
Yeah.
Because of the work you'd done in Samoa, sort of rebuilding that situation from corruption?
So, little old Samoa, tiny island in the Pacific, 200,000 people, went through the same thing, obviously on a way smaller scale, but essentially it was the same rebuild that was required. Normalisation of FIFA.
Let's make FIFA normal again.
There's an excerpt from the FIFA Reforms Committee report, which Stephen has pulled out to quote, to kind of put some context for those that aren't super into kind of football politics, what it meant.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing. It says FIFA is currently going through the worst crisis of its history. The current crisis should also be considered as a unique opportunity for FIFA to renew itself. Thus, in order to restore confidence in FIFA, significant modifications to its institutional structure and operational processes are necessary to prevent corruption, fraud, self-dealing, and to make the organisation more transparent and accountable. So they, I guess, to set up this committee, they're looking for people with integrity, right?
Yeah.
That is the key component. And then you get selected to be in this select group.
And then, that was another pivotal moment. It was like little old Samoan New Zealander going on up to Zurich as part of these reforms. And that was, I was the only woman in the room, and I distinctly remember the very first meeting, feeling super nervous and walking into this boardroom to all men in suits. And I remember also quite vividly, I was wearing a skirt on that day, skirt and heels. Great pair of heels, actually. And thinking, holy shit, I'm one of a kind in here. Yeah.
Did you have the flower?
I had the flower.
Did you have the flower?
I had the flower.
Can you explain to us the significance of the flower and why you wear it? Particularly, again, you've described it as a room full of suits. For those that aren't, FIFA then was probably a very traditional, well, it was, I was part of it. It was a very traditional organisation, always suits, very, very formal.
Yeah.
The sight of a woman with a flower in her hair was maybe only a handful of people around the world did it at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I it's a say. We call it a say in Samoa, and I wear it everywhere I go, actually, like everywhere. And I do that because, well, I explained to you guys the experiences I had in Samoa, like that Special Olympics program, the passion that I felt for the game. It all grew from my time in Samoa. And honestly, I think like Samoa for me has a very special place in my heart because it was a turning point for my life, my career, my journey into football. I met my husband there. I understood my culture, my roots. I became who I am today because of my time in Samoa. And I never want to forget that. And I never want to forget that it's what I learnt there in that journey that put me on the path to where I am now. And it doesn't matter how high I get or what organisation I end up in, I never want to forget that. And that's why I always wear it. It makes me feel connected to my purpose in this sport. And sometimes it gets so intense. I mean, football is the most political sport in the world. The money, the interest, the commercialization of it, it's just so intense. And sometimes it's easy to forget why we are there and who we serve. And for me, the flower is that. It always reminds me of that boy in that village whose life changed forever because of football. And sometimes you just have to be reminded of that. Yeah. So I had it in that first meeting. Yeah. And it felt out of place, real out of place.
Does it feel normal now?
Now it's totally normal.
Yeah.
If I don't wear it, people are like, where is it?
Yeah.
Demanding to see it.
That's what we said, eh?
Yeah.
Put it back in. Okay, so this is where it starts to get really epic. So 2015, you're in the Reform Committee. 2017, FIFA appoint a chief women's football officer for the very first time. And have I got this timeline right, that in that Reform Committee, you and Gianni, who's now FIFA president, were working really closely together, and he was really impressed with the work you were doing, or you guys had a really good relationship?
Yeah.
And then was it his job to appoint you?
Yeah, so that was the first time I met him. He was the Secretary General, or the big boss of UEFA at that time. So he was on the committee representing Europe. I was there representing the Pacific region and Oceania. And because I was the only woman, I advocated strongly for more women to come into football, especially in leadership, and for women's football to be more resourced. And we did all these things. And it was like a super serious, full-on FIFA committee atmosphere. So, you had to table proposals, you had to write and draft reform regulations. And he's a lawyer, he has a legal background. I'm like West Auckland Massey High School, no university education, street smart, but maybe not, So I needed help. I knew what I wanted. I knew what we needed and why we needed it. But to articulate it and put it into legal speak and put it into actual reforms that could be written into the Constitution, that's where he came in. And he was actually in that committee. Every time I put something on the table or spoke up, he was the first guy to back me and support me in all those cases. And he helped me to draft what I needed to draft to get it approved. And now, in fact, what we drafted together is enshrined in the statutes of FIFA. So it's also like a kind of a full circle moment, because I was able to get those things across the line. He somehow became the president of FIFA. Neither of us were even dreaming of anything beyond what we were doing at that point in time in that committee. But he eventually became the president. I went back to my job in OFC. I was super happy there, working in Auckland, and I had a dream job, working across the Pacific region, expanding my impact. I was so happy. And then I was in the office, and Mount Smart Stadium was where the old OFC office was. And I got the Swiss number on my mobile phone. And I was like, And the first time I saw it, I was kind of a bit busy, so I didn't answer it. I just blanked it, and Seamus knows what's that like.
That was Seamus's move for about 5 years.
No, getting blanked. I know what it's like to get blanked by Sarai. Don't worry about that.
The other way when you head to competitions.
So eventually I answered it, and it was it was Switzerland. And that first call was actually from Matthias. I don't know if you've met Matthias. He's like the right-hand man to Gianni.
He's the hand of the king, to use a Game of Thrones analogy. He works the lobby. He's a guy that works the lobby. It's incredible to see him at work.
He's the dude. Yeah. He's like a savant. Like
Yeah.
seriously, like working with him is like he just operates at this other level. He's on the Matrix level. Anyway, it was him. And I know him well. Then I didn't. But he opens up the call like, "How you doing? How's things? What's happening?" And it's like 5 to 10 minutes of small talk. And I'm like, what does this guy want? Like, seriously. And eventually he got to the point. He asked me, basically said that they wanted me to come. They've set up a division for women, dedicated to women, as part of the reform, to drive forward everything that we had written into those reforms. And they wanted me to come and lead it. And I actually didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. Yeah. But of course I was like blown away, and I think I even told him I needed to get back to him. Like as if I was going to say no. But I did, yeah. And then I hung up that phone call and I just stood there for, I don't know, it felt like ages. And then I rang my mum straight away. And as soon as she answered, I started crying and I said, "Mum, I've just been offered this job. I don't know what to do, da-da-da." And mum response, was, "Let's pray." And I got down on my knees in the office in OFC, and I was on the phone, and my mum was praying, and I was crying, and we prayed together. And then, I accepted the job.
Did you have moments where you were talking to someone maybe outside of the football circle and you'd be talking about your new job? They'd be like, "Oh, cool, what is it?" I'm kind of chief of women's football across the whole world.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry?
You're not doing banking anymore, are you? Nah, I kind of moved on from that.
211 member association. Yeah, it's kind of my job.
That's an anecdote, right? First day in the office is a world map behind you.
Yeah.
Because the world's a big place.
It's a fucking big place. And when you go into FIFA and all the executive offices, they have these giant world maps like behind the desks. And I remember on my first day, like, I don't know if you've been to FIFA. Like FIFA, the building FIFA in Zurich is like a freaking bunker. It's like this massively impressive, state-of-the-art, incredible building on the hill in Zurich. And it reminds me, even now when I drive in underground into the bunker, of this program I used to watch when I was a kid called Maxwell Smart.
Yeah.
Get Smart.
Get Smart. Yeah. I can't remember the tune. Yes. That's exactly it.
So good.
And you have to, and he, in the start of that program, he goes through all these doors and all these things and these secret things and blah, blah, blah. That's what it's like when you enter into FIFA. You like enter down and there's doors open and you have to use your fingerprint to get into, it's like this intense like environment. And that's what it was for me on my first day. And I actually remember video calling my mum on my first day when I was walking into the office there, because I was still like in this moment of like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm working here. And holding my phone up in front of me with mum on video call as I was walking into the office and being like, yeah, look at this, mum. And mum was on it at the same time, like being in this moment of like, you know. And we got to my office and my name was on the door, and I remember holding up the phone and like, look at my name on the door and whatever. So it was like this really cool moment. And then I went in and I sat down, and all the people that were greeting me left, and I was like left in the office. And there's like this massive football pitch to one side with all the 211 flags of every country there, like on the side of the pitch. So you kind of see it and you're like, oh, fuck. I just remember looking for the Samoan flag and spotting it and being like, okay. Then I sat in the chair and then I turned around to this giant like world map that was behind the desk. And I remember thinking, holy shit, we are not in Samoa anymore. Like it was just this, it just dawned on me the magnitude of the job. and I freaked out. Like, I just had this little moment sitting alone in this office in Zurich in the middle of winter. It was snowing. I had the wrong shoes on. It was a terrible start to the day. And, yeah, just looking at the world map and thinking, oh, my God, what have I gotten myself into?
Because it is quite daunting, because it literally didn't exist before.
Yeah.
The job.
No.
Was the job description like a blank bit of paper?
Yes.
Like, are you just making it up as you go along in the initial stages?
Well, the job description was like basically 2 sentences, which essentially said in a roundabout way, you're in charge of women's football all over the world, everywhere.
Hey, Gianni, you know that law degree? Might want it back, mate. This job description's...
It's unreal. It's unreal.
Yeah. So it was, I just remember that first day, like just thinking, oh, man. Have you heard of imposter syndrome?
I've written imposter syndrome on my notes.
Yes.
Like right there.
That's
I was like,
exactly what it was.
Did you have that?
100%.
For how long?
I think it was the first, I don't know, probably the first like couple of weeks, because it wasn't just starting a new job and a new company. It was moving to Europe in the middle of winter with freaking minus 10 degrees and snowfall outside. Coming from West Auckland, living in Samoa, you know, I'd never seen any of that.
Which was harder for you, the transition from New Zealand to Samoa or the transition from New Zealand to Switzerland?
New Zealand to Switzerland. Yeah, 100%, hands down. It was a culture shock. Like, people talk about culture shock. That's the first time I actually understood what it meant. Like, I think New Zealanders have a certain way about them. In fact, I know now New Zealanders have a way about them because I've seen enough countries now and met enough people to understand how New Zealanders are unique. And I carried that with me to a country that didn't accept that.
How do you mean New Zealanders are unique? What do you mean specifically?
Oh, I've learned now with this Women's World Cup, they call it manaakitanga. And it's something that we live in the way that we interact. It's lining up at Pack and Save in the checkout counter to get your groceries and having a full, deep and meaningful conversation to the person behind you that you've never met before in your life. And you walk out of there knowing what the names of their kids and whatever and blah, blah, blah. It's that. I don't know how to articulate it apart from explaining it like that. That doesn't exist everywhere, and it certainly doesn't exist in Zurich in Switzerland. Like, if you go up to someone with that same kind of feeling of knowing, they look at you in disgust. Like, they feel offended. And I only know now it's a cultural thing. In the beginning, I just thought everyone was assholes. Like, really? But now I know it's like a cultural thing. Like, the Germans and that part of Switzerland, they just culturally, they're very closed off. They have very, very tight-knit groups that they grow up with, like their friends from young and their family, and that's their group, and that's that. And to try and penetrate those friendship groups and it's just impossible. So the way that we are, like, just yarning to anyone and having a good chat and a laugh and whatever, over there, they get pissed at you if you try and do that. If you're too familiar with them and you don't know them, they get really offended. And that was a shock for me in the beginning, because I just went in there super naive. I didn't think there was any kind of cultural lessons I needed to learn. It was Europe. I was like, okay, this is going to be fine. But yeah, I learned really quickly, and it was lonely in the beginning because I moved alone. By that, I mean, my husband was working. He's a quantity surveyor, Mark, and he had a good job. He was in a good company. He had just started like in a new role. He was doing awesome. And I was like, wow, like, just let's not uproot everything. I'll go. Let me like go up there and just like see what it's like. Let's see if this thing is legit.
Let me just boss women's football in the world for a little bit and just see if it's all it's cracked up to
No,
be.
but it was like this big unknown, and I was really like, okay, let's not uproot our entire life and like turn everything around. Like, I need to go see if it's real. So the first year I went alone, just me. And combined with that culture shock, the distance, the time difference, and just getting into a new company, like the first month was lonely. It was freaking lonely, and it was hard, and it had me in that same position, questioning again. And then you combine it with this new world, the world map, there's 211 countries. Women's football was also relatively new to me. I mean, I've worked in football for a long time by then, but I hadn't been specialised in women's football. So I was also having to learn a whole bunch of stuff about the women's game as well. And I felt like an imposter, like really. I really did.
Was there a moment when that subsided, or was there a key part or a trip or anything that you can think, like you have pinpointed in your Samoan journey, where the penny dropped?
Yeah. I would say it's a collection of moments, but the thing that gave me confidence, which I realised really quickly, is that I had a leg up on everyone there because I had been in a federation. I had rebuilt the sport of football from scratch in a country. I had been exposed to football in a developing setting with challenges in front of it. And the people I were working with, awesome people, but many of them had never even been into one of our member countries and visited them. And I realized when we were having these conversations, we were going into meetings, I was trying to get my head around it and develop a strategy quite quickly, that actually little old Samoa and what I learnt then and there and the lessons that I still carry with me now gave me a massive leg up on all of those people. And I was able to contribute to the conversations and build, in fact, the entire global strategy to grow women's football off the back of those experiences in the Pacific.
Amazing.
Which, as a sentence, is nuts, but in practicality, 211 countries, like South Sudan and USA, like you couldn't get more polar opposite in terms of women's football experiences, I imagine. First, like the newest country in the world and the powerhouse of women's football.
Yeah.
And you've got to bridge the gap between those two.
Yeah, that's a daunting task. Yeah. But it was, I remember the first session, because the first thing we had to do, which we were tasked with doing, which is also like a nuts moment, was like, okay, we're here now, we've got this new division, we've reformed the organisation, we have all this constitutional change, we need to come up with a global strategy for women's football. I was like, okay, here's your first task. Easy. Fuck, man. I was like, what? Okay. And we, in the bunker, like, the thing about FIFA, this office in Zurich is like, there's all these like Swiss restrictions around the building. So there's like, it's 6 levels, right? There are 2 levels that are above the ground, and there are 4 levels below the ground. So we're in, I call it -3, where they have all these meeting rooms there. And I went down there with my team, and we spent a full day just like with, what do you call those? Sticky notes, post-it notes, just writing like all the challenges, the reality, what it means. And I remember like we must have been down there for, I don't know, like 8 hours. We had lunch delivered and everything, and the whole entire wall of this entire fucking thing was just covered in multicolored post-it notes. And this was another moment, and the team were exhausted and whatever, and I was like, that's fine, we'll set it up for tomorrow and whatever. And so they all left, and I remember sitting down and looking at all the post-it notes and being like, holy shit. This is crazy. What is this? But that was literally the start of it, and we were able to, and eventually that room full of Post-it notes with the, obviously the experience of the room combined with visits to many different countries, conversations, meetings and everything, we were able to develop this strategy, and that's carried me through to today, yeah.
How did your nerves compare match day -1 this World Cup versus match day -1 2019 World Cup? Because that was your first major event, right?
Yeah. It was different because in this World Cup I've been involved from the get-go. Like the bidding, the selection of the host countries, like the first initial meetings, like everything from A to Z, I've been in it. Whereas in 2019, the structure was slightly different. We had like a whole events delivery kind of arm that were in charge of delivering the event. So I was in charge of what we call the product, the strategy, like setting the tone, the brand, the overall kind of product. But the delivery, I just washed my hands of it, handed it over, and it was like a whole nother area that was in charge of it. Whereas this one, I'm it from A to Z, the product, the strategy, the brand, all of it, the whole building of it, the expansion to 32 teams, everything, as well as physically delivering it, meetings, the logistics, the operations of it. So yeah, this one was way more intense. And just the fact that it's here, it's home, like I feel a lot of pressure.
And the fact you've smashed it. Yeah, that's amazing. This is just like the best episode ever. Perks of the job. Meeting Maradona?
Yeah.
You met Maradona?
Yeah. I met Maradona several times. I actually played football with him.
No.
I swear to God. We have this Congress football tournament where the delegates from the 211 countries, they get to play like small-sided games with some FIFA legends against each other. So it's like Oceania versus Africa versus Europe and the FIFA team and blah, blah, blah. And Maradona was one of the legends who was involved in that tournament. He wasn't on my team. I played against him. But that was a moment where I just remember going out onto the field, 7-a-side, and Maradona, I mean, he was old by then. His knee was heavily strapped and whatever, but man, he still had the magic. He still had the magic. And I just remember thinking, who the fuck can say that they have played a game of football with Maradona?
Who can say a lot of the things you've said?
Who can say that?
Yeah, it's an incredible body of work, really, when you put it down. And also it's really, again, putting the pieces of the puzzle together, it's really easy to see why you are successful because you've seen it from ground zero right the way through. I imagine, though, as well, it's not without its challenges because we talk about women's rights, we talk about women's football, we talk about discrimination, we talk about racism. Your job will take you to places where access and those things still don't exist and are still challenging and are still, I guess, open secrets.
Yeah.
Are there challenging moments in the role as well where you feel like as much as you're trying to break the door down, the door's staying locked?
Yeah, big time. Yeah. But I feel like I've learned enough to know how far to push it. And that's a fine art and a skill, actually, to know the environment enough to understand that this is the limit. Don't push past here because that's not going to benefit anyone. But yeah, there's hard moments as well. I mean, even in the build-up to this Women's World Cup, there was some, I wouldn't call them scandals, but a few moments that were tough to deal with. There was some stuff about Visit Saudi, who is a FIFA sponsor. They sponsored the World Cup in Qatar. They're a sponsor for the Club World Cup as well. There were some talks about them coming on board for women's football as well. And here in New Zealand and Australia, people were absolutely up in arms about that, just because of, I guess, the human rights stuff that's happening in Saudi. That was tough because I've seen a part of Saudi through football, which is totally different. Like, we've been working with women in Saudi Arabia for like 3 years now, and they've set up the first ever women's league there. They had their first ever national team game. So I have this different lens on it because of the work that we've been doing through football. And it was quite hard for me to deal with some of the rhetoric around, you know, how could FIFA do this? How could you be talking to a partner like this? I got a lot of DMs, like real negative ones, some of them quite abusive as well, which you get used to as a public kind of person. But yeah, there are definitely challenging moments, and we got through that, and it's fine. But yeah, it's never easy, let's say.